Hello, my name is Lance Weiler. I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you in Warsaw today for Learn, Do, Share. I had a wonderful time last year, and unfortunately, I am in Los Angeles right now, so I won't be able to attend. But I wanted to take a moment to thank the City Hall of Warsaw for supporting our efforts in the city. And I'm excited about the workshops that will come from this event that can be applied to concrete issues that are happening in Warsaw. So, the one thing that is interesting to note is Learn, Do, Share is a very open, collaborative space. Today, as you go through all the sessions, as you meet new people, think of it as kind of a yes and environment, meaning that like the way when you work doing improv and you work with actors, you say yes and it allows a scene to live, it allows a scene to continue. The moment that you say no and but, a scene will die. And so today I ask you to just kind of step into this space and just be open to new ideas, to speak with things that you feel passionate about, and to open yourself up to learn, do, and share. I founded Learn, Do, Share probably almost about 8 years ago. And it's important because it was a very transformative thing for me personally. It was a moment where I wanted to start to apply my storytelling to more purpose, give it more purpose, to basically allow what I was doing in terms of the stories that I was telling, not only to be entertaining, but to also tackle challenging issues, to allow people to realize that stories could go into the world and they could help people to mobilize and they could help people to connect in unexpected ways, and they could be used as a tool to develop new programs and to develop new types of projects that could help to build infrastructure or to bring people together. And Learn, Do, Share was kind of born out of that. Today, what I want to talk to you about is this idea of purposeful storytelling, this idea that story, play, and design can lead to real impact. And I'm going to give you a couple different examples today of work that I've been doing both at Columbia University, where I'm the director of experiential learning and applied creativity, and also the director of the Columbia University Digital Storytelling Lab. So the examples that I'm going to give, I think, are interesting and valuable because they will help to point to a number of different potential opportunities, I think. And we keep continuing to work in this space with the goal of being able to share openly what we find in an effort to take what is core to us as human beings, which is that ability to tell stories or receive stories or share stories, and apply it as a way to make real social impact. So the first example that I wanted to share is that we've been working very hard on an empathy lab. We started working on a project with Refinery 29, which is a media company, and we were looking at this idea of gender bias within storytelling. And Refinery 29 is doing a series called Shatterbox, where they take 12 different female directors and they put them together around stories of power. So each director directs a story of power. So power is the overarching theme, and they wanted to help empower female voices in an industry that's been rather marginalized in terms of a lack of female key roles for females behind camera in terms of directing, writing, producing, so forth and so on. And so this project looks at 12 different stories of power from all over the world. And so what we started with was a series of labs. We ran 2 Learn, Do, Share labs in New York with a diversity of people from all different walks of life, from all different industries, and it was cross-generational, so we had all different ages. And we ran those labs as a way to kind of do some design research, as a way to listen, actively listen to what people were feeling, what they were thinking. And we ran those 2 labs, and that led to kind of a variety of data that we then kind of pulled out, and we realized that a lot of the issues around it were stemming from identity, stemming from a feeling of self-worth, stemming from this notion of not being able to have your story be heard. And so what we decided to do was we decided to build an empathy lab. And the idea with the empathy lab was we realized that so many different participants within the labs that we ran have been talking about empathy, or have been talking about a gap in terms of empathy, meaning that in the fast pace race to just live, a lot of people were kind of caught up in their own needs and were forgetting about others, or were not able to put themselves in the shoes of other people. And so what we decided to do was we decided to create an empathy lab that would allow people to slow down. It would allow people to take a moment to reflect, and hopefully what it would do is it would open them up to new possibilities, open them up to new perspectives. So with the Empathy Lab, we started by running the labs in New York. I'm out here in Los Angeles because we just ran one in South Central in Lemire Park. And that particular lab was looking at how we could use VR technology, use 360 filmmaking as an ethnography tool, as a way for youth in the neighborhood to kind of go out and collect wisdom and stories from people from all over the neighborhood, to find places of power within the neighborhood, to find places of knowledge within the neighborhood, to find places where people had memories or felt something. And then the students will kind of construct 360 stories, the kind where, you can throw up a Google Cardboard and you can kind of look around and you can see a perspective. And those stories will then be passed to an urban development process, which is called Vision 2020, where they're working in the neighborhood to put together a new urban plan. So the idea with this particular lab, or this initiative, this 360 VR filmmaking initiative, is to allow for marginalized voices to be heard within an urban design and development process. So on Saturday, this past Saturday, June 4th, we ran a lab where we did a lot of prototyping. I'm a big fan of running things locally, putting them into a community, working with the community, designing with and for the community. And so we had from high school students all the way up to folks who were retired. And what we did is we prototyped some of those ideas. And the way that we prototyped them was with this idea of teams working to build empathy glasses. And those glasses were intended to help somebody see a different perspective. If you put on the glasses, you might see something that allowed you to envision the future of what the neighborhood could look like. You might be able to look at the past and remember things that you thought worked really well. Or it might point to things that you realized you had frustration about, but allowed you to see a way that you could potentially change them, how you could alter them and how you could make them better. And so what we did in the lab that we ran is we got together and we kind of thought about transformative stories. We looked at it from a feminine imagination. And basically what we wanted to do in this particular prototyping session was look at the way a feminine imagination could affect the design of an environment. Here in the United States, most of the urban environments that we have, and most of the things that we have in terms of even technology and a variety of other things, have been done through a male lens, have been done through a male perspective. And so we thought it was interesting to add that idea of a feminine imagination. And so what happened was the teams worked to R&D and to create these prototypes. And they were very, very crude prototypes. They were pipe cleaners and cardboard and different colored lenses and just things that created a prop that allowed people to go out into the community and try to see if people would put these glasses on. And would they try them on? Would people try these glasses on? And what was really interesting was the environment that we built inside with a small group of people. When it came time to kind of go out into the world and kind of go out into a neighboring park, we were able to get people to try on those glasses, and the glasses allowed them to tap kind of a creative spark, or when you're kids, when you're young, you're so incredibly playful. And I think as you get older, you kind of lose some of that, because you get caught up in what it is to have to live, to have to pay the bills that you have, to the responsibilities that come with being an adult. And what was fascinating was to watch the playful spirit that started to come out of people with just something as simple as a prop, as simple as a pair of glasses. Even if they were made out of pipe cleaners or they were cardboard, the teams would walk up and say, do you have a few minutes? Would you like to play with us? We have these glasses that will allow you to see the future. And then people would start to interact with these glasses, and then they would start to talk about these things that they valued within the community, within the neighborhood. So in a sense, we're doing ethnography, right? We're pulling information from voices that might not otherwise be heard during a design or development process. And we're doing it in a playful way. So the goal is that those youth in the neighborhood can go out and they can go and interview a variety of people by walking up and saying, hey, here's this narrative prop. Whether, I think it will end up being some type of empathy glasses, some type of glasses that allow you to see the future, the past, the present in a different way. Glasses that allow for a type of conversation. And so I think that that's interesting because it creates a very playful space that allows people to open up in ways that maybe they wouldn't otherwise if we just walked up with a survey that said, what do you think is working in the neighborhood? What do you think is not working in the neighborhood? What do you need more of? And so this part of South Central is really interesting because the community has come together and they're designing what they feel the future of that neighborhood should be. So as a metro line is coming in for the first time in LA and will open later this year, the community is already at work and has been at work for a long time to design what they feel their neighborhood should be. And so I think with the empathy glasses, it's just another way to kind of go out a little bit wider, to extend what is kind of a participatory urbanism project that allows for more voices, and realizing that that notion of play, that notion of story, and that notion of connection, human connection, is so valuable now that in the digital society that we live in, those human interactions sometimes get lost, or they get marginalized, or if you're communicating with somebody across Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of those social platforms, you see that as a social connection as opposed to when you're in person with somebody. And I know now that more and more has become about text messaging, it seems odd when a phone will ring. It's more about short burst communication. So in projects like the Empathy Lab, which has been in New York, is going to be in Los Angeles, soon will be in Chicago and San Francisco, and we're open to anybody else in the world that would like to experiment with us and be part of it. The Empathy Lab, its main goal is to try to help allow people to see another perspective, and in doing so be part of a development and a design process that allows them to use story, play, and design, and eventually technology, to make real impact in their communities. The second project that I wanted to talk about is Sherlock Holmes in the Internet of Things. This is a project that's come out of the Columbia University School of the Arts Digital Storytelling Lab, and it's a project that is a massive global collaboration. And when we started it, I had no idea what would really happen. I knew Sherlock Holmes was really fascinating, and I knew that the Internet of Things was a really interesting new emergent technology or category that needed further, investigation, both from a storytelling perspective, from an ethics perspective, from a policy perspective, and so forth and so on. And so what we did is, at Columbia, we put together a massive open online collaboration. And basically what that means is we took the work of Sherlock Holmes, a lot of it is now in the global public domain, and I was very fascinated with Doyle's work because when I looked at it, what was interesting was when Doyle was writing his fiction, he was writing about new emergent technologies. He was writing about non-contaminated crime scenes. He was writing about blood stains. He was writing about different types of blood testing. He was writing about things that local law enforcement did not know. They weren't aware of. And so when law enforcement was reading those stories, the fictional stories, all of a sudden they found themselves in a situation where they were like, oh wow, that's really interesting. We should actually apply that technique. And so a lot of the things that were in fiction in Doyle's work found their way into fact, found their way into becoming the cornerstones of forensics, the way it's used today. And so I thought that was really fascinating. It was an example of where story is an innovation driver. Story is all of a sudden allowing for a playful experimentation into new techniques, new forms and functions, and I thought that was fascinating. And so what we started to do with Sherlock Holmes and the Internet of Things is we put together a massive online, offline collaboration, as I mentioned, and people could go back into Doyle's work and they could find an object from Doyle's literature. You know, they could find something that was a cane, or they could find a pair of glasses, or they could find an umbrella, or they could find a music box, and they could identify something, and then they would create almost a design document around it. You know, how could that object become enchanted? The Internet of Things is fascinating because right now there's probably about 1.5 trillion sensors in the world. There's sensors in our homes, there's sensors in our cars, there's sensors in our places of work. All these things around us are rapidly starting to connect to networks. For instance, here in Los Angeles, the hotel I'm staying in, I can connect my phone to the mirror and it can play music. You know, but there are other things that are happening with like a variety of sensors in all types of objects that surround us. And so David Rose has a really interesting book that talks about enchanted objects. And so with this project of Sherlock Holmes, we were like, well, can we take something from the literature of Sherlock Holmes and then bring it to life and turn it into an enchanted object? Bring a music box into the 21st century, give it certain functionality that it's aware of when you're close to it, so it starts to play music. Or if you touch it and hold it, it can sense, you know, your body temperature, or it can sense the amount of pressure that you put on it, and so it plays a different song. Or if you have it at a certain time of day, it lights up in a certain way. So if it's at night, it's lit up in some way, or if it's during the day, it's a different color, so forth and so on. And so we were fascinated with, what does it mean to tell stories in a physical space? How do you tell stories in a physical space? And what does it mean if the world that we live in is rapidly becoming connected, and eventually we'll move away from these devices? The device I'm talking into right now, which is a mobile phone, which has been a major kind of technological advancement. What happens when screens are everywhere? And when I say screens are everywhere, they might be in fabric, they might be on a shirt, and they come on and off when they make sense. They might not necessarily have to be the way that we look at them now, that dominate our time or dominate our focus. And in fact, they might live more in the periphery, or they might only come out when we are ready for them or want them or need them. So that's an interesting challenge. You know, what does that mean ethically in terms of the stories that we tell? What does that mean in terms of the policy, in terms of a variety of different issues that surround that topic? But I think what was interesting about Sherlock Holmes and the Internet of Things is it's a project that now has about 2,000 collaborators from 60 different countries. And over the last year and a half, there's now been over 100 self-produced events all over the world. It's a copyleft project that anybody can get involved in. You can go off and you can commercialize whatever you do in it. You just need to return knowledge, code, whatever you've learned. You need to contribute back to the program. And so Sherlock Holmes and the Internet of Things is forked, which means, like in software, you can have projects fork. You can have the initial code, and then people take that code, they mash it up, remix it, and turn it into something else and something new, and then they contribute back to the core of that code so others can build upon it. It's what culture should really be about. It's what we've been trapped a lot in intellectual property, but now we find ourselves in a situation where you're able to do things in a more open way. You're able to challenge the notion of how things are shared and how people learn and how stories and play can help to make impact in the world. And so 4 design principles emerged. I'll leave you with this as the close to this talk. 4 design principles emerged. And I think these principles can be used across all kinds of work. Can be used for purposeful work, can be used for entertainment, can be used for marketing, can be used for a variety of things. And these 4 core principles were really fascinating. The first is called the trace. We found by running this over and over and over again, the experience, that people really responded when they can see some part of themselves in the story. So people wanted to see that they were in the story in some way, that they made some contribution that they could see themselves in. So that was the trace. The second was this idea where we had a lot of activities within it that were team-based or individual-based. And last year at Learn, Do, Share, we ran Sherlock Holmes in the Internet of Things, an early prototype there that took about 100 and some people outside of the stadium. And we ran the prototype, and there were parts where people were together, and then there were parts where they were separate and individuals. And what was fascinating about that was we found that teams worked really well when they were about 5 or 6 people. When they were too small, certain personalities would dominate. When they were too large, they would get into what is known as a consensus kind of circle, a vortex, almost like nobody could make a decision, nobody could make up their mind. And so this idea of moving people between individual and team tasks and back and forth granted agency. And so that granting agency was really critical and very important to what we were doing. The third, I should say, not the last, but the third is a thematic frame. And that thematic frame allows people to have a common language. People knew Sherlock Holmes. They knew what a murder mystery was. They knew, in most cases, who Sherlock Holmes was. And even if they didn't, if they saw a taped out body, they would know there was a crime. And so there was a common language there, and they were able to share a grammar and able to collaborate with each other because they had that common language. And then, the last one that I think is really interesting is serendipity management. This idea that through leaving white space, like a lot of interactive work or immersive work tries to tell too much. It should be really about showing, and it should really leave white space for people's own imaginations to fill the gaps. And so with serendipity management and social movement, we would build moments into the experience where people would go and meet someone new. And out of that, these creative sparks would fly and things would be produced or created that were totally unexpected, that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so I think as we kind of move forward, or as you move forward into the work that you do, and you think about ways that story can be an agent for change, I think those 4 principles are fascinating. The idea of a trace, the idea of granting agency, a common language or a thematic frame, and this idea of social movement and serendipity management can be applied to many different things. So I want to thank you for coming and taking the time to be a part of Learn, Do, Share. I love Warsaw. I'm very sad that I wasn't able to be there this year. The team there is amazing, and I'm so excited about the work that we're doing with the City Hall of Warsaw and the potential that story, play, and design can have to make real change. So enjoy today and have a wonderful time. And the one thing that we ask is that if you find something that you feel is important, or that you learned from, or that you feel passionate about, that you learned today, the only thing that we ever ask is that you just share that with somebody else. We do these events all over the world, and it's something that I'm very proud to be a part of, and I'm very fortunate and feel lucky to be a part of such a wonderful global community. So thanks so much, and have a wonderful day.